Hey everyone, super excited to kick off this panel. I think that we can all agree that one of the major themes of this conference is how can we design the best UI for augmented reality? We hear a lot about it when it comes to virtual reality, but we've assembled really the best minds. I can't think of a better panel than the people we have here today to talk to you about it. So the first thing I'd like you guys to do is just introduce yourself, say the company that you're at, and maybe talk about one thing that really inspired you to get into this work in terms of UI and UX.
Should we start from that side? Okay. My name is Valentin Heun. I work here in the Media Lab, built a tool called the Reality Editor. It's a tool that allows you to edit reality, and it does that with the means of augmented reality. We really want to aim to build super intuitive user interfaces for the physical world, and you cannot get that with apps right now. So augmented reality is the killer application for that.
I'm Kat. I work at an architecture firm called Arrow Street, and I am an architect and virtual experience designer, mostly working on a couple of VR projects and just starting to move into AR. And I think something that inspires me about augmented reality is that it has the potential to be very collaborative and participatory, and that's definitely what we're looking to get out of it.
I'm Kachina from Arrow Street, and I am the lead VR, AR, now I guess MR, developer and designer. I think, Valentin, you might have summed it up pretty well. I think what got me interested in AR is the merging of kind of like documents or some sort of design world with your real world experience.
I am Raji Kannan. I'm leading the core technologies team at Meta. And what brought me to Meta was neuroscience, deeply understanding how users interact with your system. And we have already been trained for thousands of years in evolution for picking up objects and how do we interact with the world. And using those cues to develop a good user experience, that's what excites me.
Hello, my name is Chirita Mores. I'm a PhD student at the Fluid Interfaces group, actually same group as Valentin. And I've been always interested in human perception and how we perceive reality. My background is both computer science, but also design and some sort of filming, 3D animation. So I think augmented reality actually brings both of these two worlds together. And I think that's why I'm actually doing UX and UI stuff. So,
Chris Grayson. I'm with Reality Factory, very new VR venue opening in Soma. My background is primarily in the creative department of ad agencies. Left the ad world to get involved in tech startups, was ECD of Telepathy, a Tokyo-based smart glasses company. And that probably covers it well.
Great, fantastic. And can each of you tell us a little bit about maybe what you think the biggest misconception is when it comes to augmented reality and how, when you're designing for it, you think about this?
Should we start from that side again?
Whoever wants to take it.
So I think the biggest misconception is we look at it as it would be a desktop computer, a single user, a single experiences interface. And from that perspective, it doesn't really add anything to what we already have with a desktop. And where augmented reality really becomes strong is when we look at situations where you have, I call it a high granularity of technology in the space, where so much technology is in the space that you, with a normal desktop computer, you would lose control of these systems. When you use augmented reality for that, suddenly you are so much more capable of interacting with these systems and mediate the connections between these systems. And that is where we have to look into. And also these systems are not just built by ourselves or our own companies. They're built with everyone around here. So we really have to aim for technology in that field that that is open and owned by anyone and that everyone can access.
We're going down the line.
Yeah.
Sorry. I think I would definitely echo what you said. I think it's traditionally, or it's being thought of in some senses as an extension of the desktop computer, and in order for it to really transcend and become something more than that. It has to be thought of as something that can be manipulated and changed by multiple users and things like that. Really get it to be social and collaborative.
Something I'm actually running into right now, especially with the AR development, is kind of the field of view. So there are some limitations there, and you have to think about how you're going to design this thing in a three-dimensional space where you can interact with it, you can see it, and it's not getting cropped in some funny way, or it seems more natural to keep that sort of natural environment going and not interrupt that for the user.
I think the biggest mistake that we can do is to bring the icons, menus, and everything in the 2D world and put it onto the 3D and say it's 3D. A 3D experience, we have to think spatial as we are used to in our daily life to organize things around. There are a lot of aspects that goes into how you can give a lookup interface with a proper 3D, and it's not bringing 2D to the 3D world. So that's.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there is a fundamental difference is that, augmented reality can be with phone, it can be projection, it can be also sound, it can be completely 3D using some sort of HoloLens or the Meta. And I think each one of them brings a completely different experience. So the user interface has to adapt to that. And it also has to adapt to the user to make it comfortable, easy to use, and just kind of being entertained while you're experiencing something. So I think we first have to define what is augmented reality, and maybe they're different. We actually are saying augmented reality, mixed reality, and different even terms. So I think for each one of these platforms is going to be completely different user interfaces, and we have to design for them in a proper way. So we have a lot to think about. Yeah.
I think the big thing is that haven't really been best practices established yet, which I think is mostly a good thing because we're learning this medium still. It's trying to find the medium between doing something that a user has a previous relation to. So when you talk about thinking about it too much like a desktop, you want to think about it something like the user has a familiarity with, but at the same time be able to take advantage of the new things that technology can allow for that a 2D screen can't. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm noticing a theme here. You guys are all kind of pointing to this big transition from this 2D space that we've all kind of been locked in for the past 10 years, and now we have to design for a three-dimensional world. And what do you guys think when you're developing concepts? A lot of the initial concepts for these ideas start at the designer level. What are some tips on developing a new concept, a new story, working with multidisciplinary teams that's different than what we're used to before? Whereas we might have done a wireframe on a whiteboard that says this is screen 1, screen 2, screen 3. Now we have to think about audio, the immersive experience. Would anyone like to comment on how we can better team at the concept stage on the user experience level?
I think an interesting point is, we see so much right now that's saying, okay, you have a marker and you put something on it. And you can also do that in a 3D game on the computer. There's no need, it's just that you can move it around, right? But what you really can do here is you can reach into the physical world and learn from the physical world what happens in the world. If you can make a patch wire between two things in the physical world and it's a concept that works, you can adopt that. I think a lot of the things that I experienced that feel intuitive in augmented reality are adoptions from the physical world, and don't compare that with these kind of I don't know the word, like when you put in that we had that with the phones where things suddenly look like something real but aren't. It's not the same. Here it is, you need to connect with the physical world, and you need to create kind of a alternative physical thing that connects and it works the same way, and then it feels natural and it comes with a natural feeling.
I think in terms of the design process, I guess I would say it's relatively similar to the way that we construct our architectural deliverables. But I think it's given me the opportunity to just be very critical and contemplative about the ways that we interact in the physical world now, and how can we enrich that and enhance that with the technology that's available. So really just thinking about how we can use the tech to enhance experiences that already exist and already are familiar.
Yeah, I think in architecture, a lot of the tools that we use are, they're all kind of on a computer, you're using a mouse to get around, but maybe sort of simplifying those tools because you're doing something that feels so natural to you, you're doing something that becomes like second nature, and kind of opening up like just a variety of things you wouldn't have been able to do before, because you are kind of consolidating everything into this sort of natural sort of environment.
Something our CEO Meron keeps telling about is, in Think AR, only two things matter: tools and content. And when you think about a drawing tool, how do you think about the paper, you think about the dexterity, you think about a lot of items in the tool. So designing in terms of a tool, when you think about the content, think about what's the object in front, how does it react to your interactions, what is the relation between that and you, and knowing these really helps. And also resolution, how you render, all these matter as well. The technology to go with it matters as well. But tools, content.
Any great prototyping design tools that the audience might be interested in digging into?
Well, I wanted to mention that for me, the best design process, especially if you're in a multidisciplinary team, is just like make a video concept idea. So it happened to me once that I was working with a person that had physics background, and actually he was not able to imagine. Just like if I was telling him like trying to imagine a beach, he would never like he was not capable. So it was really hard for me to share what I had in my mind, especially because each one of us has a completely different way of thinking and like imagining things. So just even colors or whatever. So it was really hard for me to express that. And when you're showing something, especially if it's an interactive video, they catch it super fast. And whatever is your background and whatever however you imagine things, if you see something, it's going to be the best way to just like make it. Yeah.
I actually, you're talking about working on large multidisciplinary teams. I mean, I've worked on a lot of really large corporate website designs, and tend to be pretty large teams working on projects like that already. So I don't really see that as sort of a problem. I kind of think the thing is you have to start with like, what's the problem that you're helping the user solve, and that's going to be different in different applications. I mean, I'm most interested in the consumer space, but what the perspective I'm going to be looking at it from is going to be different than, say, somebody that's working on enterprise software that's, say, solving something in a very specific industry, whether that's like aerospace manufacturing plant, is going to be very different than the problem that somebody's solving that's a mass consumer that wants something that's efficiently giving them information and sort of annotating their reality with, what's pertinent to them. So it's very much a sort of use case basis, I think. Makes sense.
And so how would you sort of nail down the problem and then guide your team towards developing a good story? What is the designer? What's the designer role in that process?
What is the designer role in that process? There's always somebody else telling me what that role is supposed to be.
You can wear multiple hats if you like.
Yeah.
I'd prefer.
No. What's my role? My role is as much as I can get away with. No. I'd say it's generally I find that I'm usually working with somebody that say from strategic planning background, and they've put together their research on the user, and then I'm interfacing at that stage with exploring the most efficient way to solve that problem. I read once that the best UI designers are really impatient people. Because you're always trying to find an efficient way to solve a particular problem in the context of whoever that end user is. And if you kind of look at situations like, if every time you're, interacting with an interface and you're going, how can they do this in 2 steps? So I think it's just putting yourself into the shoes of the person that's going to be using that interface.
Yeah, and touching on that point, I think one of the most fascinating things about augmented reality is that you have to design a narrative in which you don't control all of the pieces of that narrative, right? Because you don't know exactly how people are going to be looking in the space, other things that can come into it. And could you guys speak on that as well? We don't have to go in order if anyone just has an idea. It looks like Judith, you're nodding your head. Maybe you could speak to that.
Well, that's why I think maybe you can try to simulate different stories, and also, of course, write a storyboard and just even talk to. I think it's really important to talk to people that actually have no idea about what AR is. Just talk to even a kid or your grandpas or something like that, because then it's when you're gonna know if you're designing a good user interface. When people complain about, I don't know, some menu or something like that, and they complain about the user, that's super bad. I mean, this is a bad design, so you have to learn from these people that maybe have no idea about the system. And actually, sometimes they give you amazing ideas, and yeah. I don't know. I don't know if I answered actually the.
No, definitely, very interesting. And I think also something that we can all really think about is how can you get that user information when, we're very fortunate to be in this room, to be in AR in Action, have access to this technology, but the majority of the world right now doesn't have access to the tech. And so have any of you guys thought about how to bring in, different types of people to actually test out the technology that would otherwise not have access to it? Is that a part of UX and UI testing?
But why do a lot of people don't have access to it? Because the smartphone is so well distributed in the world, and every smartphone can have an augmented reality experience. I think, we talk a lot about classes and more complex technology, but for many years in augmented reality, we run after a killer application that we never reach from our own perspective. And we will not reach from our own perspective the killer applications through these other tools, but everything that we need to build augmented reality, we already have it, and it's already around, and everyone can use it. Would be my perspective on that.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, I think part of what we've sort of tasked ourselves with as architects is how do we integrate this technology into our buildings, into our civic spaces, so that even if you don't necessarily have the technology, are there ways that you can access it just by having access to the space or having access to the city? And I think just to go back to some of the questions more related to the design, I think the best user interfaces are ones that you almost forget that you're using. So that's certainly what we strive for.
In many companies, even startups, I think there could be a tendency where the technology teams and the user research and the design teams are disconnected. And there are multiple ways to connect them together. One is, look at the user data that's collected and look at patterns of how we can get the technology there. The reverse is once you have the technology, how do we do user testing again and get the flow between them going? Because one existing without the other is also a problem. So a tight process or methodology that can exist for easy flow of communication between those teams, and how to imbibe that as a culture in the organization, that's also critical.
Great, and I think we can open it up to questions from the audience.
So my question's primarily for the Aero Street folks, but I'll make it broad enough that others can weigh in. So technology's changing design. Recently I was at a GE conference, and they were talking about additive technologies and 3D printing radically changing the way they design parts, as opposed to historically, hand machining and milling parts. They can now print 3D parts that were previously completely impossible. And I'm wondering if AR and VR and designing experiences is impacting the way that you're actually designing buildings and spaces that previously were unavailable because the medium was restrictive. And then perhaps if you guys in your disciplines, if these tools and this technology is bringing up possibilities for you to change the way you design the physical world.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So there are a lot of ways. I think it's easier for architects to see this, but a lot of the programs we use do influence the way we design. Like we see buildings that look like they were made in SketchUp versus Revit or Rhino, CAD, versus hand-drawn even. And I think that this technology is definitely opening up a new form for design. I know internally when we use it, we are able to take a look at how we've designed something and critically look at it and maybe do some different iterations based on what we've seen in the 3D space versus on a 2D plan. I think it really is influencing the way that we design. I wouldn't say that it's influencing it in a certain direction other than the fact that we are able to critique our work a little bit more realistically than we would be from a two-dimensional plan or even a rendering.
Yeah, I think the VR and AR technology has given us the opportunity to integrate what the gaming industry does so well. And what's been great about seeing our clients' reactions to VR and AR content is that they're able to get involved in the design process. It's not as much a presentation and response. We're actually able to create something together, and that's something that really helps us and helps them with the end result.
Thank you, Aero Street. This was our biggest panel of the 2 days. I think that says something that we want to get a range of perspectives. Did you have a last thing you wanted to say?
Yeah, I wanted to add an important thing to this from IoT perspective. Augmented reality fundamentally changes the way that we look at products. Take a microwave, for example. What is a microwave? It is a heating unit, it is a little screen and a few buttons. And it's a unit that somebody compiles and it's what it is and you buy it. From an augmented reality perspective, you say, okay, there's a heating unit, there's a little display, there are a few buttons, I can separate them into modules, I can link them up with augmented reality, and now I buy this one heating unit, I buy from another vendor that display unit, that cooking unit, perfect knobs, all of these things. I can totally rethink what an object is, what products are.
Great. So you guys, if you could head off the stage, we have our next speaker, and this is sort of a surprise.